Hello and welcome to Conversations with the Voice of Reason. I'm your host, Benjamin Boyce, and today's conversants are Simone and Malcolm Collins, a couple of pronatalists who are walking the walk, not just talking the talk, and in this conversation, which rounds out my series of interviews with Malcolm and then Simone, and now the both of them, they try to interview me, but I don't know if anybody's really necessarily successful at that endeavor, but we get as far as we can with figuring out what I think about things, specifically detransition and the political climate right now and things that you can and cannot say, and all those really interesting issues at the edge of the Overton window. You can find links to Malcolm and Simone's work down there in the description. If you enjoy this content, consider liking, subscribing, and even buying me a coffee via the links below. Without further ado, here is Simone and Malcolm Collins.
But it was so worth it. You know, sometimes it's just worth it to be in that much pain. And a bucket of sour cream and onion fried chicken is one of those things.
By the way, we take this banter and we typically put it at the end of episodes, but yeah.
No, more like I say something embarrassing before I know Malcolm's going to record. And then he's like,
No, Wing Bucket has sour cream and onion fried chicken wings. It's a good, and it's in the center of downtown Dallas. Now, is it still there? They were actually talking about franchising it the last time I was there.
I'm
and I was
sure
like,
it's
I
still
wouldn't mind investing in that.
Every time I go, there's people there. It is worth it.
You guys have a lot in your heads. How old are you collectively? Or you
collectively,
guys are both in your 30s?
I don't know, 60?
Yeah, like 60, 65,
More
62?
than that. We're 70, 73 together.
That's the point of marriage, right? Collective age.
Collective age.
Yeah,
I like
no.
that. That's good.
Yeah.
Collectively.
But no, I mean, I'm always thinking about, what's going to be a good, investment or whatever. And
How many franchises have you bought into?
None.
None. Oh, wait, there was the one. I don't know. Did we invest in Jonathan's? Or did we just talk about it?
No, we never got the opportunity. We would if he let us.
Yeah.
You have like 5 shares in Staples or something like that?
All right. No, okay, so there's this weird phenomenon where if you are like, I'm sure you'll get to this. Have you had people offer you equity in their companies yet?
No.
Like you're more famous than us on YouTube, so I would figure you would have.
Yeah, but you're plugged into that whole technocratic set, right?
Yeah. So I guess it's the whole techno nerd thing.
Yeah. No, yeah, you guys are all up in that investment community. You know, you're part of a clan. I'm trans clan. If I'm trans anything, it's trans clan. So
I was talking to Razib, and he's like, "Oh yeah, that happens to me all the time." So it's definitely part of like our scene.
Silicon Valley adjacent. Yeah.
Anyway, so I'm gonna wind down here on the end.
No. Go. Flow.
No, I'm gonna do the part where we're gonna start the episode, and then this gets plugged in at the end of the episode, just because you don't want random chatter. And during that,
you guys are like the opposite of me. I just let it roll.
See, I that's how I am. I love when a podcast begins. I mean, like Red Scare, they just like begin in the middle of God knows what, and I'm here for it.
I don't know how they got popular. Like, I don't get it. Like, sometimes I look at a popular podcast and I'm like, I don't get how you're a popular podcast.
Because they're internet mean girls, and you're sitting in their cool person room, and you want to sit there with the cool girls.
They're cool.
Yeah,
they're cool, and they have a nice voice.
Yeah,
pair of voices.
It's very relaxing. It's low energy, but in a very relaxing way.
Yeah, like kind of club girls, but they don't have a hangover, but they haven't started partying. It's like this nice little between zone.
Yeah,
like
it's beautiful.
Coherent.
Liminal. It's like intellectual liminal space. Very calming. Yeah, like ASMR, but not gross. Really nice.
Yeah, no, it is very ASMR.
Yeah.
So, okay, I'm not actually do it now.
No, do it. Do it. You're fine.
Hello, everyone. It is so wonderful to have you with us here again today. We have a very special guest with us today, Benjamin Boyce. His YouTube channel has one of the highest overlaps of subscribers with ours. And if you watch it, it would be immediately obvious why. He does lots of very high thought, high intellect, intellectually dissonant interviews.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is I can get a trickle of what you think in your perspective from the interviews. But I haven't, I'd love to have an interview that's like the you interview, what you think on things. So I'm excited to at least be one of the people who's doing this. And one of the projects you've been working on recently that I think would be a really great start to this is, I guess I call it like the detransition project, which is lots of interviews with people who are well-known voices in the detransition community. I'd love it if you could just get started with what got you thinking about this and where you see things changing within that community over the past year or so. Because
can I answer that question by asking you guys a question?
Of course.
Like, when did you become cognizant or invested in what we call the culture war in its current iteration?
Wow.
God, that's a good question. Honestly, not at all until they started firing at us. Like, it's very interesting. So I would have considered myself.
Is this about Spankgate? So just like two or three weeks ago?
No, before Spankgate. It was the beginning of the pronatalist stuff. Really, as soon as we started getting public attention, you're sort of forced to pick a side these days. At first, both sides were kind of yelling at us. The one side, when we'd sit down and try to talk with them, they could have a lucid conversation. And then the other side, there just wasn't really a conversation. It was just concede and submit to our world perspective.
Okay. I'm actually going to say it's earlier than that. It's when we got involved in education reform in the state of Pennsylvania, and the mere idea that we were critical of the legacy education system meant that we were going to be Republicans. Just like, period. Like, of course, you're a Republican because you don't think public school is perfect and in need of more money, and therefore, obviously.
So what year are we talking about?
At least 2019. Yeah.
2019. Okay, so that's pretty late.
We were like firmly centrists. And then when we were younger, we were full out, like, quite progressive Democrats, I would say both of us.
Blue pills.
Yeah.
Do you guys have any remembrances, or you might be too young, of Gamergate?
Oh my God, of course.
But when Gamergate was happening, like, I was well on the side of the Gamergate. Like, I was like, okay, this whole Five Guys situation is ridiculous. This is clearly a breach of journalistic integrity. But I think back then there was still a believable disconnect between the, of the time, the Tumblrina army, the Tumblr
and
internet and the cloud agendas and all of this insanity, and the real mainstream Democratic Party. Like, I didn't think that those people had any direct connection on the type of policy that would be implemented by, like, a Hillary Clinton government. Yeah. That changed pretty dramatically over time.
What's your memory of Bernie Sanders, the 2016 lead up
I
to
hate
that?
communists. I never
communists.
liked Bernie. I mean, my favorite
progressive
story about
but not
Bernie,
commie.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're already the red pill is already kind of leaking into your worldview.
No, I loved who was the other guy, the old guy who was sort of the anti-Bernie, who seemed really cool.
Ron Paul?
Ralph Nader?
Ron Paul. Yeah. Ron Paul. I really liked Ron Paul. Ron Paul seems like a righteous
libertarian bros were really
so like in the early political dissident days, I was Ron Paul count, not Bernie camp. I mean, one of my favorite things about Bernie, and this is like one of my favorite stories about him, because to me it represents who he is, and I think he truly is. Like, both him and Ron Paul, I think, show themselves really honestly in the public sphere. The big it was when he was a kid, younger than us, like in his late 20s, I think, is he went to a commune, and they kicked him out because all he would do is stand up in, like, the common room and give speeches every day. And I was like, this man has not changed over the past 50 years. And so he is honest about who he is. It's just, I think, a malicious element in society. But our malignant element in society. But what about you? Were you Ron Paul, Bernie?
Well, so I went to this college, hyper-progressive college. I didn't know that it was going to be hyper-progressive. It was just down the street from where I was living, and it was really cheap, state school. I was older. I hadn't gone to college, so I got the Pell Grant, and it was just like basically free college for 4 years. So I could pause my life and concentrate on what I wanted to concentrate on, which is what I ended up calling narrative arts. Like, what is the function of narrative? How do you build it? How is it deconstructed? What are the different ways to arrange, rearrange, and derive meaning from it? And so I went to this place called the Evergreen State College in Olympia, Washington, which has a very non-traditional structure, no grades. Courses are like completely immersive, 3, 4, 5 professors for a quarter or a year. You just go there, you sink your teeth in, and a lot of independent work. So that's why I went there. But when I got on campus, it was like stepping from, what year was this? 2013 back into 1993. They had pictures, like posters everywhere, Stop the War in Iraq, so they're still kind of a little bit behind there by 10 years. Which would all, by the time I left, all those posters would be replaced by the BLM poster, right? Oh. And then they had big posters about no one wins under patriarchy, like this really crusty kind of old, kind of weird Gen X feminist kind of bluster and gusto. And I'm like, okay, that's really weird. This is like kind of ersatz or anachronistic. And as I progressed through my degree working on my stuff, the civil rights, or the civil rights 2.0, anti-racism via D'Angelo and even Kendi, kind of came and became central to the entire experience of the college, where the administration empowered very radical teachers to basically try to redesign the entire college experience around ending racism in our time. Whoa. And that blew up in their face phenomenally. It just completely, what happened at my last 4 weeks of school is that the students who were taught to fight the system and end racism turned that against the system that taught them that, and took over this college, took people hostage, live streamed the whole thing on the internet in this super cringy manner. Oh, no. You guys should watch my documentary. It's if you're into cringe, if you're into like the end game of this progressive bullshit, I document it all. But once
I'm ready for this.
What's the documentary called if our fans want to watch it?
Yeah,
it's called the Complete Evergreen Story. I'm currently doing a watch through because it's 7 years. The 7-year anniversary just happened, and me and my wife are now going through and watching the whole documentary. It's really extensive, and it's not even complete because there's just too many stories going on. I was there watching that whole thing progress, and I was working in the media department. I was on the camera recording these workshops and these lectures that were incredibly they're like trying to reinvent racism, and everybody's falling for it, and you're like, wait, this is the wrong direction. You guys are going in the wrong direction. They started worshiping black students.
Affinity groups. That's
what?
Affinity groups. Like, I know, it was like, well, we need like black people to hang out with black people and white people to hang out with white people because, this, like, and I'm like, whoa, you are reinventing racism.
That's basically what got them a lot of press, because the college had every year they had, based on a Douglas Turner Ward play called Day of Absence, where this southern town, all the black people don't show up for a day. And it shows just how much this town relies on the black folk. Okay. Right. And then they did that every year at Evergreen, kind of do this, the people of color, the POC, would go off campus and they'd have a little thing, and then they come back and then they have a day of presence where everybody gets together and like have a cultural sharing, multicultural, positive thing. Okay. But one year, 2017, after the election of the former possibly next president, Donald Trump, they decided to reverse that and ask white people to leave the campus. And they even required white students to not be on campus, go out in the woods and do classes like under tarps in the rain, because the campus was going to center people of color, because they wanted to be inclusive under diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then Brett Weinstein, who's an evolutionary biologist who has a lot of, you guys probably heard of him by now. He kind of stood up against that and then got flack back and forth. And so when this crazy narrative, I won't spend too much time on it right now, but there's all these layers upon layers upon layers of stuff going on in this tiny little campus. When the students do this uprising, they live stream it, they're acting just insane. And the internet gets wind of this. Now, this is post-Gamergate. This is 2017. A lot of people post-Gamergate on YouTube had gone from, anti-feminism to anti-SJW stuff, which would then become anti-woke stuff. Right. So there was just a lot of hay being made out of social justice warriors. And that was just how people made their money, was doing all these cringe compilations. When the Evergreen stuff just dumped all of that material on there, they had a heyday. They had an absolute heyday. And I was already kind of like interested in what was going on the internet, but I didn't understand that people would just run with the narrative and not actually talk about what was going on behind it. And so what I did was I just took my phone and I started to record like a view from the inside. And then I worked in the media department, so I got my hands on all of the primary footage of how the teachers taught the students to rebel and explicitly said you need to uprise and destroy these bureaucratic institutions because they treat you just as bad as they treated your ancestors in the 60s or in the 1820s or, you know, in the Caribbean and stuff like that. Directly, they said that. So my job as a YouTube person when I got onto YouTube was to chronicle that. And I spent a lot of time just focusing on that one story. And then a similar event, to get to your question, a similar event happened up in Canada at Wilfrid Laurier University, where a young TA named Lindsay Shepherd was, she showed a video with Jordan Peterson and this other guy arguing about pronouns. And she was teaching in a composition class, and she apolitically just shared this about composition, because if this is how language is changing, like, what are your thoughts?
Yeah.
And her professor and her you know, the guy in charge of the department over there, and then their DEI Parachik all took her aside and like grilled her for 40 minutes, and she recorded the whole thing. They broke her down into tears, this total struggle session, and it was all about gender. And then that hit the internet, and again the internet makes hay with that. And I'm like, there's something else going on deeper in there. So I started going through that college and looking at the gender issue. And I saw that these gender activists, these trans rights activists specifically, are just the most borderline personality, narcissistic, Machiavellian characters on the planet. They claim to represent this marginalized group, and then they proceed to act like complete tyrants. And just like the black people, or, you know, POC did at Evergreen, like this handful of just radical idiots took over and then just smeared that community that they supposedly represented. It's just replicating. So this social justice ideology, or whatever this thing is, I don't know what you guys, how you frame it, but that has a pattern that just goes over and over and over again. Once I got into the gender aspect of it, I was just fascinated with this topic because I was tired of race, and I don't think that there's an end game with race. Yeah. I don't. Maybe we can talk about that. What you guys are your thoughts on the end game of race politics? But gender stuff is so dynamic. It creates children. It transcends race, and we always are struggling. And it flies in the face of this kind of liberal-ish assumption that we're all created equal, and that noticing difference is really problematic. But it keeps on like protruding into our safe space.
Yeah.
So I think both the race and the gender thing have really backfired on them in completely unique and different ways recently. The race thing, and this is fundamentally what progressives don't understand.
1 second. Sorry, interviewer hat. You said them, backfired on them. Could you just define, for the sake of the conversation, who they are?
I'd say the larger memetic structure that is obsessed with race. Yeah, like, I mean, the normal American doesn't give a shit about race. Like, it's just not important in our daily lives anymore.
So you're saying, so them is defined by the activists that are actively trying to end racism. Yeah.
They have created a world where they seem to believe that America is like, okay, this is the way I genuinely think the world works in their head. America is 70% white, 30% black, and the 30% black is like this oppressed class. That is not the case in America. For example, Hispanic population is about twice as large as the black population. They cashed in all of their Hispanic chips by over-indexing on the black population in a way that completely marginalized the Asian and Hispanic population in this country, which are both fairly significant voting blocks. And then they went even further by going this whole anti-Semitic route recently, which has, you know, the Jewish population in this country, even if they're not a big voting bloc, they do have a lot of institutional power and wealth. And so that was astronomically stupid of them. And so I think that this sort of it's one of the things I often look at when I'm looking at like media representation. Is media representation, like, if you want to talk about who's not being represented, it's Hispanic people. Like, white people, we get like less than we probably should, but low numbers when I'm talking about like percentage of the population. Black people, like, they seem to believe that black people represent all minority groups, and that all minority groups like and identify with Black people. And that's just not true. One of the things I point out is that in the LA riots, the communities that were hurt the most were the most recent immigrants because they had moved in right next to the Black community. And in that instance, those most recent immigrants were South Koreans, which were then radicalized because it was their community being burned to become a far-right community. This happened within many Latin American communities during the BLM riots, is that the towns and neighborhoods that were being burned and up in the shops were mostly Hispanic owned. And of course, the media wasn't talking about this, but that again doesn't matter because the media doesn't understand Hispanic families. So I, as a white person, I get my media from like the news, right? Hispanic families get the media from their family networks. That is like their source of what's true in the world.
There's also like Hispanic media, but it seems to be somewhat divorced
it's not as
from.
important as family network information chains.
Yeah.
And so we have a lot of our company is almost entirely Hispanic. We like our friend network is heavily Hispanic. This is why we used to split our time between the U.S. and Lima.
Between Miami and Lima. So we were not
Miami
in America.
and Lima, yeah. So so the media, like the progressive tool for manipulating public opinion, doesn't work as well against Hispanic communities as it does against other types of communities. So they
where's their outcry from 2020? Were they just ignored, or did they not complain?
If we didn't see complaints. We saw internally. We saw we've been left behind. Like internally, they're like, okay.
There's been a huge shift in the Hispanic community towards conservatism. And then they have a problem that they don't understand the real American Black community. So the real American Black community is more than anything else distrusting of authority. They're very conspiracy theory is the wrong word, but they are very open to these right-leaning ideas of the powers that be are lying to you in attempts to manipulate you. And this isn't like gullibility. It's something they've gone through multiple times.
It's learning from history.
Learning from history. And it is clear to many in the Black community who is the power that be today. And it's this, urban monoculture, progressive, whatever you want to call it. In regards to the trans stuff, I mean, this is insane. And as you say, it's insane. Like, I can't imagine being like a real trans person or like a real lesbian or a real gay person. And now somebody says like, I'm queer. And I'm like, well, by queer, do you mean that you're a sexually aggressive cis male sex pest that's pretending to be a woman? Or do you mean that like, well, no, a lot of these quote unquote trans women, when I was growing up, I was very involved in the LGBT movement. I really support the real gay, lesbian, and trans community. But what is being represented, like the people who took over this movement are just cis male sex pests, largely speaking.
Well, I mean, and they're female enablers. If you look at every major feminist organization that's connected to power, they're all on board and pushing the trans stuff. Hardcore.
Yeah, well, I mean, and it spread like a virus through many lesbian communities and ended up, one of the most interesting, I was listening to, and I'd love to hear your anecdotes around this. A lesbian who I respect talking about this recently, and she's like, there was this weird moment when I went to a group house where 3 lesbians was living. And I went back a few years later and all 3 of them were transitioning. And I was like, wait, what are the odds that all of you just happen to be trans? Like, this is supposed to be an incredibly rare thing. And so I think that's, something that we've seen as to why this disproportionately happened in lesbian communities. I think, and I know this is a very offensive thing, but I think that women are slightly more susceptible to social norms changes. Like they're more likely, and you see this in the data as well. They're more likely to support whatever the perceived social norm is.
Is that some sort of evolutionary Stockholm syndrome baked in because women would be captured in combat and just have to adapt to new
could be, and also like there's more dependence as someone who, like, when you're more likely to spend a significant or not insignificant portion of your life vulnerable to pregnancy or having an infant with you, it would make sense that you'd be more compliant with whatever society you have to kind of depend on for some protection or social services or at least a little bit of assistance.
Well, also, I think that part of this is probably downstream of religiosity. Women historically were more religious and more spiritual than men. And we've argued in the past that gender has sort of taken on the role of the soul within progressive circles, where they're talking about, well, there's something about myself, and it's not biological, and it's not how I was raised. It's different than either of those, but it controls who I fundamentally am. It's like, well, that's what we used to call a soul. And so I think a lot of this is a type of a religion.
Yeah, I love how they don't do that with race, like my inner black man. Like if they went that route with the racial soul, then Rachel Dolezal would come out on top.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm wondering. So when you saw this happening, when were you like, did you think you were a progressive or like identify with the progressive movement when you were younger?
No. I grew up in suburbs of Sacramento, mostly. So kind of, I guess, kind of red, but kind of purple. And, my dad's pastor, so we were pretty much in church all the time. I did a lot of paper routing from 11 to, 18. And I would listen to Rush Limbaugh a lot because he was really entertaining. And, he did all these bits and skits and stuff like that. And then I kind of just went apolitical. And then when I wanted to get political again, when, post 9/11, George Bush W just kind of goes in this holy crusade about just going after people that are millions of miles away or hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands of miles away, however far Iraq is. And I didn't like that. I didn't like the warmongering and stuff, and I wanted him out. And then John Kerry concedes. I'm like, this is just bullshit. I spent all this energy caring about this thing that doesn't care about me at all. I was also living in Portland at that time. In the 2000s, when it was like the Portland that people wanted to move to before people moved to and made it something else,
right?
Portland squared. But and I just had the sense before Barack and during Obama's era that we're just kind of in this bubble where we're not really connected to reality, and we have these beliefs. I just had the sense we have these beliefs about like what truth and goodness is, but we are so coddled in this bubble, and someday it's gonna break, someday it's gonna pop. And I was uncomfortable with the smugness that just became more and more ramped up over the course of Obama era. And then I thought Bernie was, had some sort of mandate of heaven on some level, and his treatment by the Democratic Party was just so awful that I just said, screw you. And I went, I didn't go pro-Trump, but I was just really happy how upset Trump made everybody because they were so hypocritical, higher on their own farts, and that just pissed them off so much. So I kind of slowly became trollish, but then when I saw what happened at Evergreen firsthand with the end game of this racial stuff, where they turned me racist, when I was on campus after that hostage situation happened, and I saw a black person, and I got literally, first time in my life, got scared and just turned around and went another way, because I'm like, this person has all the power and can completely lambast me, accuse me of all these things, and even beat me up. And I have no recourse just based on the color of my skin.
Imagine how Jews feel today. Have you seen some of these videos?
Yeah. That Jew thing, the Jewish thing, really throws a wrench in the whole system. It upsets it, which just makes me really interested in how it. Because like a lot of like the Jewish people were complicit in a lot of the anti-white stuff, but then once it comes after them, then they're like, oh no. We are the OG oppressed class. We've been oppressed longer and harder than anybody because we've been living with these whiteys. So don't turn that stuff on us. But it seems like in colleges and stuff, I saw a lot of that. Like that, a lot of Jewish people riding the anti-white line up until. Like it blows up in their face. And then you're like, okay, well, what did you expect? You're dancing around with leopards. This sounds like I might be a little, I don't know how it sounds, but I think
the problem we have is the conservative Jews and the Orthodox Jews never went along with the progressive bullshit. It was always the Reform Jews, but Reform Jews are richer and they're more likely to be in colleges, and they're more likely, but I mean, again, like this is one of those things, like we always say, that it's like people don't confuse like Unitarian Universalist Christians with like Catholics. right? And yet they often confuse like conservative Jews with Reform Jews, and I'm like, it's
a branding issue. It's their names are all the similar, so you just lump them all into one thing. They're all of one thing,
But I mean, the Reform Jewish movement basically has no fertility rate. Like, they're going to be gone soon. They're basically just a malignancy which is affecting this one generation of Jews.
Malcolm, I have to like inspect this idea, because you put a lot of stock into fertility rates, like being drivers of the meme complexes and stuff, or like these meme complexes are not.
Yeah, I want to hear
disseminating and stuff, but. Are we not at a time where the meme complexes are faster than genetics by orders of magnitude? Can't they travel faster, infect more people than the other ones that breed people, so that they can just...
And you're absolutely right about that. But they, in sort of their wave, they wipe out. So it's a bit like saying, like, okay, the Black Plague is spreading through our civilization right now, right? Except it doesn't kill people immediately. It just sterilizes them, right? And I am pointing to one community that's been sterilized, and you're like, yeah, but it's continuing to spread in this neighboring community. And I'm like, well, I mean, yes, it is spreading in the neighboring community. I don't disagree with that, but it eventually burns out. Like, it is true that it is spreading in neighboring communities right now, but it hasn't fixed its fundamental issue that it hasn't figured out how to replicate itself other than through taking children. And because of that, I just don't see how it survives. It can in some countries, like in Germany, where they've gone like, full Nazi, where they're like, okay, well, private school is not legal in this country anymore.
Oh, okay.
So we get all your kids. It can burn itself out. And then what does that end up looking like at the end of the day? Germany becomes a Muslim country or something like that, because they know how to protect their kids. I mean, eventually, whichever group fundamentally knew how to protect their children in a way that other groups didn't, or the groups that come out on top after the disease is done, we're just sort of in this period of fallout now where we can sort of predict the various outcomes, but we can't predict them with 100% certainty or anything like that.
It's just because the way that information travels so fast now, and the way that kids are plugged into the internet from such an early age, and the way that these algorithms work in a black box, I don't think that the battle's so much we can just rely on fertility replacing it. There actually has to be active, and that's what you like. Why your work, I think, is so important, because you guys are speaking into this place that's dominated by these anti-natalist forces, right? And you're providing pushback and upsetting the rad femmes and poking fun at the all these different groups that you guys find yourself being on the
it's actually
whipping end of the whip up.
Interesting point you make that has me reflecting on something that I hadn't reflected on before. Which is to say, you see, you're showing off your skills as an interviewer here. So this is why people need to go to his channel, right?
People never get me.
So the thing I was thinking
you are
about,
the gazelle, I am the cheetah.
Right? Is the different communities and how they react to, like, when I say communities, I mean cultural groups, and how they react to, or how susceptible they are to the virus. And there's a huge amount of differential here. So conservative Jewish communities seem to be uniquely good at preserving their community values without going crazy. Like they seem to have almost a complete immunity to these intellectual viruses in a way that doesn't cause them to radicalize. As to why, I think it's because Jews are predominantly an urban cultural group. We did a video recently, something like 89% of Jews or 98% of Jews live in urban centers.
Can I just what do you mean by radicalized? Can you specify what you mean by that?
So a weird thing that happens to some communities when they're hit by the urban monoculture is the iteration of them that is resistant to it or survives the interaction becomes like crazy radical. So I think this is what happened to Protestant communities in the late 90s, early 2000s, is that they were hit by the urban monoculture, and their reaction to it was to become the form of evangelical that fits into popular culture today. But this sort of radicalization in response to contact seems to burn itself out. I mean, that iteration, that evangelical Protestant, doesn't really exist in huge numbers anymore, or not in a way that's actively engaging in the cultural conversation. If you look at the well listened to conservative commentators, they are predominantly of Catholic or Jewish heritage. You're looking at like a Ben Shapiro or like a whatever, right? Or who's the Rush? I think both Rush Limbaugh and who's the other one are both Catholic.
Rush was Catholic? I didn't know that.
I can't remember who that. No, the one I'm thinking of is I want to say his name was Bill something. He also wrote
O'Reilly.
Yeah, it might be O'Reilly. Bill O'Reilly. Oh yeah, Bill O'Reilly. Yeah, I'm pretty sure Bill O'Reilly was Catholic. He also wrote crime novels. But the question is again, okay, why Catholics? Why did they not go crazy? They went a little crazy in response to this, and their fertility rates have fallen more than other groups, but they seem to have a little bit more resistance to deep penetration. And again, it's because they're a predominantly urban cultural group. Catholics mostly settled in urban environments, and so they're
already adapted to what is the special sauce in the urban milieu?
Were adapted to the proto version of this mimetic virus. They before,
which would be old school multiculturalism, like being able to coexist with a bunch of different kinds of groups and then seamlessly integrate through commerce, basically.
If you live in a city, you have to learn culturally how to prevent your kids from being deconverted in an environment where you're a minority. The Protestant groups just never needed to pick up that skill. And so when this sort of virus like swept across the country, like the Black Plague or something, it just completely decimated their communities and turned them woke like super fast. And then they began to put up what we call the colonizer flag based on a part of our Discord, which is the triangle flag. We call that the colonizer flag.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and then the other faction of that same group that you're talking about broke MAGA and became the blunt of the regime or the monoculture's jokes and fears and a lot of the riling up. Like they are the enemy. If those who didn't succeed in breaking towards progressivism are the number one outcast group. They are the ones that Biden talks about when he's like, I'm going to unite us together to destroy this one group in our country. These MAGA, ultra MAGA, people who are going to the NASCAR, who still believe in Jesus, but the wrong Jesus, the white Jesus or whatever. So they are a very powerful group, but they are vilified inside and out by every rung of the vertically integrated messaging apparatus.
Yeah. Well, and one culture that was uniquely susceptible to this, maybe even more than the Protestants, were the Mormons. The Mormons just were destroyed deconversion rate wise within their culture.
And your theory is that because they were so isolated within like a very specific chunk of time, like 50 years in American history, they took a break they were disconnected from the path of American culture for a certain amount of time, and then it caught up with them?
No, so the Mormons were destroyed for a somewhat unique reason. So Mormons were both isolated. They lived in mostly Mormon communities for a long time. But then in addition to that, the Mormon community became hyper fixated on trying to fit in, like be normal,
integration,
not be weird. And this drive to fit in was the perfect like black pill or kink in their armor that the cultural viruses could use to infiltrate the community.
Yeah. I spoke with a ex-Mormon. He's a therapist, and so he works mostly with ex-Mormons, and it was just like hearing his story about how he was really plugged into this worldview, this Mormon worldview, and then he lost faith, and he was in free fall, and it was terrifying for him, so he grabbed on to progressivism. And then he realized, like, this is just as radical and just as disconnected from reality. Yeah. But there's no, like, going from a really tightly formed memeplex or whatever you want, like belief system or ideology, into this liberal wasteland. Like, there's nothing to believe in. And the people, a lot of people have to reconfigure how to believe or what is the function of belief. And progressivism is a tight or a thick belief, whereas liberalism is a loose or diaphanous belief system, like where you can have kind of, you bring your own, you create your own meaning. No meaning's handed to you. It's really destabilizing for, the Mormon frame of mind when you're really deep into it. So I wonder if there's something there about liberalism's problematic relationship to progressivism, or how this kind of liberal anything goes, you do you, we do us. We kind of just understand what reality and truth is. We're all going to work on that. Was so susceptible to this progressivism, which is a more thick belief or a narrow, myopic belief, a harder, hotter.
Well, I think you're right. I mean, I think that one is sort of the funnel that leads to the other. Like one catches you as you're falling and then funnels you towards the extremism.
Can we live in a world without extremism? And do you guys, in your consciously created ideology, and I mean that in a just a non-moralistic way, are you building into your children antibodies to radicalism?
Oh, absolutely.
Or have you played around with your ideas enough to say, okay, how could they be radicalized, and what would the end of that radicalization point be?
Yeah, I mean, the radicalization of our ideas and the dangerous radicalization of our ideas would be extremist transhumanism, i.e., AI over humanity.
Robo-wombs.
I know that's par for the course for us.
That's par for the course. The extreme radicalization is the discounting of humanity altogether, which is a potential downside of what we're doing. But we protect.
I kind of disagree with Malcolm. I think radicalism is inevitable, and we have a radical religion, and a lot of people see that and criticize us for it. But the stance is,
you guys are already radical.
Yeah, well, that you cannot be a true religious devotee. You cannot truly live your values without being seen as a radical by mainstream society. So we have to define radicalism. But you're going to be seen as a radical if you adhere to your beliefs, and if your beliefs do not immediately track with mainstream society, which in any person's lifetime, especially now in this period of sort of rapid cultural iteration, you're going to seem at some point like a radical if you do not change with the vicissitudes of changing culture. For example, if you just, let's say like you held the mainstream political beliefs about gender and race and everything else from 1992, you would be seen as some kind of radical today. So I think that the nice thing about being a religious radical is that you are at least radically devoted to carefully selected values and objective functions. That
more or less coherent system.
Instead of just like, this is what's correct. And what I would say is the worst kind of radical is one that hasn't basically come to a conclusion where they can show their work. They've just sort of like chosen a random, like seems to be correct answer. And then that's where they're going. And that's
I love how you're showing your work right now.
Yeah.
Little baby work there.
She is wobbly.
This is my first infant interview.
There you go.
Right?
Yeah.
You gotta, we're ruining this little infant's life by putting her on camera.
Yeah, someday someone will be critiquing this YouTube video and blurring her face out in their attempt to undo the evil we have done.
Stole her soul before her time.
It's honestly like I watch a lot of YouTube critiques of people who have babies in their videos, and always they blur out the babies, and there is this kind of like, I'm preserving their soul. I'm not going to be a part of this terrible machine. But anyway, what I'm really curious to know is what has surprised you in these interviews, because I think a lot of us kind of come to blanket conclusions around this is progressivism, this is what progressives think, this is what gets people to convert. But I think that there's a lot lost in those assumptions. I'm curious.
Well, so I have about 80 interviews with detransitioners or around that topic, and detransitioners fall into a variety of different categories. So you have the male to estrogenized male to male detransitioner, and then the female to masculinized female to female detransitioner. And then you have the lesbian, or you have the straight girl, or you have the teenage girl, ROGD, rapid onset gender dysphoria. Read a bunch of, the fanfic, and kind of was attracted to men, but like really disliked the power dynamics. So imagine herself as a gay man to enact like that, what we were talking about earlier about like the spicy straight queer stuff. And then you have males with autogynephilia, you have males with personality disorders, you have males with pornography addiction. You have very, very hyper effeminate gay males who don't fit into society, and if they just surrender and build on that femininity, they can just be accepted as a female, because they're never going to be accepted as a like kind of Blair White, just as a very hyper effeminate male. You just don't really have a place in certain societies and stuff. One thing that surprises me, to directly answer your question with regard to that community, which is not a community because there's so many different people there, is just the resilience of the human soul. And the central key in the detransitioner story arc is where their soul speaks to them, or where God speaks to them and say, you're lying to yourself, stop lying to yourself. It's just such a beautiful moment. And then they look down and they realize, like, it's usually after a very traumatic surgery that these doctors just kind of sped them on, either an orchiectomy, penile inversion, or a mastectomy. They look down at their body and say, wait, I didn't like what I was, but this is not what I am. This is not my pet destiny or something. And you just get this glimpse that we are, for lack of a better word, and maybe kind of poking fun at Malcolm's interview with me, we are loved, and that
I love
that when we
that you
betray,
that, by the way,
when we betray that which loves us, we betray ourselves, and we can't actually function in this world without that connection, that really deep, belonging that is underneath all these other, hierarchy of needs. And that detransitioner arc, probably similar to like an alcoholic's arc. Like a lot of TV shows and movies over the last 30 years have overused the AA format, because it does have it's got this really convenient arc where somebody recognizes the truth and then apologizes, confronts their resentment, confronts their regret, and then, picks up and moves on, and then say, okay, I'm damaged. And everybody can see how damaged I am. Everybody can see how fucked up, I am, because I participated in this lie, and then it shows the lie of the system, but it's no longer a political act. It's no longer a political story. It's no longer a reformation story of the system that's just gobbling up people, this huge satanic industry that's literally sacrificing children. Like people cannot understand that our current regime is worshiping Moloch. They are sacrificing babies on the altar of this gender ideology, and nobody can see that. But if these detransitioner stories, they just show this is a human thing, and so, like, bring it back to the human, and then you go to the universal, and you see that's what it's not surprising. It's just beautiful to me. It's beautiful, like damaged flower.
To your answer there, one episode that hasn't gone live yet, because I don't want to get too canceled, too many of these too quickly.
Love it.
I'll use the word boobicide, so that
breasticide.
What I'm saying here, which is to say that it is widely known. Like, even the WHO has training courses, and Stanford has training courses for media professionals to not talk about boobicide, because it's a very addictive concept. And so whenever you have it happen publicly, they typically cover the story.
Yeah, he's talking about the real one.
Oh, I thought you were talking about like this massive amount of mastectomies.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Which is a breasticide
thing. Yeah.
Okay. So what's really interesting is that they have created this idea for young, impressionable people where they're like, okay, you are X now, and if you don't do Y, the only alternative is boobicide. And like any previous study of this would be like, oh yeah, of course that's going to lead to a lot of kids doing it. And it reminds me of this South Park episode, which we put in the other thing, where Rob Reiner is going to kill Cartman to prove that cigarettes are bad for people and that secondhand smoke can kill. Cartman's like, but he reads it and he's all happy to have all these adults paying attention to him. And he's like, wait, what? Like, and I feel like that's unfortunately what's happening to a lot of young people, is that anyone who understood psychology could have predicted the result of this ideology.
Yeah. That's I was interviewing somebody for I've been doing some interviews with my spiritual group, and just different people's stories and stuff. And I was interviewing somebody who's deeply involved in the in the deep state, literally. Like, they worked in Congress for years and years and years, under Pelosi, under all these people. And we got to the idea of the trans kid. And this person just was so on fire to protect the trans kid that I just saw in this yeah, I just really saw like what Yarvin talks about, or what other people talk about, like the global empire, like the global American empire. Like we want to eat all of your culture, and the trans kid is the one thing that can just like put these women, specifically these bureaucratic women, on fire to go and, you know, love everything about a culture except completely destroy that facet of the culture that replicates the culture, which is the cultures where culture plugs into sex, which is what we call gender. And these women want to destroy that gender thing, which allows that culture to replicate. And they think that they're like, it's so, the fire in their eyes, this crusade. And the trans kid idea, I think, is the most satanic idea, like one of the most satanic ideas of this particular century.
No, I was saying it's really interesting. So contrast this idea with a kid consenting to PDA fileness. So in one
PDF
case,
files, like
PDF
like
files.
the Adobe
No,
protocol.
he's trying not to use
I know.
man boy loving.
And boy loving.
Be proud to be a man boy lover. This is from this was the skit that they used to do on Howard Stern, where a guy would come on and, I'm proud to be a man boy lover. Anyway, so if a kid sleeps with somebody who is older than them, like that's bad, right? And I would say a kid shouldn't be able to consent to that. But like what the result of that is a single traumatic experience. If a kid consents to puberty blockers or gender transition, that is a lifetime commitment of potentially negative experiences.
And not just biological, financial and cultural and social. Yeah. Like it's all of these things. There is no escape in life.
Yet I can say, no, my 13-year-old daughter, I don't care that you find this guy attractive. You cannot, or my 15-year-old daughter, you cannot sleep with him. You fuck off. Like that's obviously a bad idea, and I'm going to prevent you from doing that. Yet if you do that in this other category, it's considered like a protected class. And I'm like, how?
Yeah. It's just people haven't thought through it. I just transcribed an interview with a young man who went on puberty blocker, spirolectin, I think it's called, and estrogenized hormones at 14. So he was essentially frozen, and the data's not in. But we're pretty sure that the brain has very specific windows when it develops, and if you miss those windows, it doesn't go through these development phases. So we're literally retarding brain functioning for these kids.
So in animal models, it's about a 1 standard deviation decline in IQ to be on puberty blockers. Huge. Yeah. Anyway, continue.
Yeah. So so he was a very effeminate gay man. He goes on these hormones and stuff, and then he comes of age, 18, 19, but he's still like a little boy, and he gets swept up in gay sleeping around culture. And I'm listening to his story. I'm like, wait, it wasn't just a gay thing. Like they had a young boy. It was basically legal pedophilia because he had all the attributes of he was locked at 14. Yeah,
he looked young,
but he's
he
19.
acted young. Oh, that's so gross.
So they're like he was preserved and then offered on the altar of this stuff.
No.
So actually, a lot of people and I know this is something that again, I think there is a real trans community, but I think that Sex Pest took over parts of the community because they realized they wouldn't be criticized if they just claimed to be trans, and they can be sex pests all they want. That actively targets underage kids for this stuff. Because that is their thing. And I'll put from Turkey Tom did a great video on one of these people. And I'll put a quote from that video here because people are like, no, you're making this up. And it's like, no, this is a real thing. It doesn't matter if it's a minority thing. What about those kids? Do you not care about them? Because some of this is sexually motivated. And to pretend it's not is just to ignore what the trans people are saying.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or the people who were considering trans people will be like, oh, they're not trans.
So I was at when I embarked on this series of interviews, I was really open to the idea. I had no idea what I understood. I had a friend who was trans, and then over the course of the years, I see this. My friend just never stops transing. It's like there's always one more thing to trans about themselves. And so I have a hard time, especially with the idea of trans kid. Trans kid is a mutation from a trans person. So I really have a hard time at this point in time really thinking of transness as anything other than something that one does. Like, I am a Smith, I am a Miller, I'm a content creator, I am trans.
Yeah.
It's the answer. There's no such, because like you can be a gay person. That makes sense to me because it's, and you can argue, I try to understand the argument, the Christian argument or the religious argument, like even if you are that, like doesn't mean you should act on it. That's a whole other conversation, but you're built in, that's an emergent property of you to be gay, to want to have sex with men, if you're a man, or a woman with women, or be actively, disgusted by the opposite sex. But transition, there's gender dysphoria, an active just dislike or hatred of one's own body, which is a mental condition. And then there's steps to cause that body to become in the likeness of what you want, which is a medical procedure. And it's an elective cosmetic procedure. And then the hormone stuff, the endocrinology on this stuff, it's so messy. These systems, our endocrine systems are way too complex. Injecting cross-sex hormones affects the entire system, not just your secondary sex characteristics.
Yeah.
It affects your brain development. So there's the libertarian argument about you're a grown adult. If you consent to this, you should be well informed. But the idea of transness is where it's a big black box, and it's really easy to swallow because it's inclusive. It's you do you. Mm-hmm. But how does that not turn into trans kid? If there's a trans adult, then they were a trans kid. They were always trans, which means that they're always born in the wrong body.
Well,
which means
this is the thing. Like, we don't, we don't say, oh, you're a gay kid, go out there and have sex with guys while you're underage. Like, and I think that we should treat gender transition the same way. Like, I can admit, like, I'll be like, okay, trans people were at one point kids. And that is okay.
So what do you mean by trans people then?
Well, I look, the human brain is very obviously gendered. There is very obviously a male and female brain. Like, my wife does not think like me. That in some small portion of the population, I don't know how small, it could be very small, 0.1%, that they are born with a brain that is gendered more like the opposite sex, especially when we look at endocrine disruptors in pollutants, which seem to be affecting this. I can see that being some portion of the population. And that these people might realize that they are in this group before they go through puberty. The problem is, there was a great study done in 2023 that looked at gendered non-contentedness in 11-year-olds, and it showed that by the time they were 23, more, or I'll put it this way, less than 1 in 10 of them was still in the gender non-contented group. The other 9 plus were entirely happy with their birth gender. And so the problem is that when people go through puberty, there is often an illusion of gender non-contentedness, which is created by puberty itself. And so people are like, well, what if I am that 1 in 10? And it's like, well, unfortunately, there's no way to know if you're that 1 in 10, at least with current research. So you're better off just banning everything before the age of 23.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, it's really odd issue to talk about because it does take into account, like the idea of like, well, what should other people be allowed or not allowed to do? And do I have any right? Do I want to make laws? Do I want to, you go in another direction, the same topic, like pornography. Do we ban pornography? Like, do we educate around pornography? But we know that pornography is a scourge. You know that it's doing a lot of damage to a lot of relationships, a lot of people. It's poison, but like, do I want to not drink anymore? Okay, like, do you just let the world eat people alive, in all these different ways, and let people like just give themselves over to this or that affliction and let God sort out?
You're right. I mean, one of the things that always concerns me is with conservatives when they're like, we need to get these, trans teachers. We can't have them talking about it in school. We got to get these trans books out of school. And because they are afraid for their kids' safety. And it's not that their kids' safety doesn't matter. Like in my state recently, this to me, what is obviously a cis guy pretending to be trans, used that cover to attack young women, nearly killed one, and had another on a kill list. So he had, and I'm Mr. Drinkham on
That's the real trans genocide. It's just happening in the other direction.
And he wasn't able to be fully punished because people were like, well, she's trans. We can't punish her. She can go into the women's restroom and attack.
She had a woman moment.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh,
women be crazy.
Probably.
It's so sexist.
No, you want to talk about sexist?
It's so incredibly
Star Wars
sexist.
Acolyte. We'll end this interview soon so I can get our Star Wars Acolyte video in. But one of my favorite moments in the episode 3 was the two actually, no, Simone, I can't talk to you.
Spoilers.
Oh no. Okay.
Watch our Star Wars Acolyte episode.
Right. We're not going to talk about scissoring on this show.
No.
You have to wait. Stay tuned for scissoring. Next on Basecamp.
Yeah. What was I going to say about I don't remember.
Trans people being sexist, Malcolm.
This issue being sexist.
There was a trans person in Pennsylvania who caused the suicide.
But for a lot of these people, it's just, I guess, cover to do whatever. Like it's cover for sexually aggressive cis men to do whatever they want, and manipulate and brainwash a lot of. Oh yes, I remember what I was going to say. So it's about targeting young people. So they're afraid that what's going to happen to these kids is that they're going to be attacked by these trans individuals. And I think that is fundamentally wrong. Like, mostly speaking, while there are a few of these cis male aggressive people who attack kids, the real risk you have is them being converted by these individuals when they're not actually trans. And so you get rid of the book, you get rid of the teacher, you haven't gotten rid of the risk to your kid. And the only way you really protect your kid is with sex education.
Never shelter, annotate.
That is the biggest defense you have against all of this. If your defense is trans people are evil or gay people are evil, then they meet a trans teacher and that person doesn't appear to be evil. And now you have lost all of the defenses that you have built.
Yeah.
You need to annotate.
Yeah. Run toward the information. Information is the truth shall set you free.
The truth shall set you free. The truth will defend you.
Yeah. Malcolm, can I ask you one more question before you hastily end our delicious talk? Thank you very much for having me on.
Oh, no problem.
At the end of our interview, which I love, I'm going to have you back on. And Simone, I'm really looking forward to having you on.
You'll have fun.
You said that in millions of years. So I'm like, okay, what's your transcendent goal? Like, what's the one thing? Because you're like, love is shit. Love is death. Love is a cul-de-sac, and it's going to end you.
Of the Puritan dating joke, which I saw recently. We put in our last episode when he goes to his partner. Roses are red, violets are blue, and both are useless. So grow wheat. That's my
utilitarian, yeah, for sure, all the way down.
You on love there? No,
you said something about the eventually in millions of years, humanity is gonna turn into God or something. I can't remember exactly how you phrased it, but you said it's like, did you have a vision of that? Have you had a
beliefs? Watch Gurren Lagann. Gurren Lagann is a very good representation. Oh, I'll send you a clip.
He didn't have a vision. He watched anime, which is what every true devotee must do. Watch more anime.
It was 50-50. He was going to turn into a twink or he's going to turn into a pro-natalist.
There you
father
go.
of 8, and you broke fertile.
So here's the thing. Gurren Lagann, it treats people who believe that Earth has a what's the word they use here? A population threshold or carrying capacity. And it treats them the same way Captain Planet treats polluters, as like these evil boogeymen who want to suppress human potential. And a lot of people saw Gurren Lagann and they didn't realize how pronatalist it was. And then, as if to like slap them in the face and wake them up, they made a second show recently called Darling and Franks, which we have an episode about as well, which is about mechs, but they can only be piloted by a cis man and cis woman piloting them together. And the evil villains in it are the life extensionists.
Not being subtle with the propaganda here.
No, the propaganda of Studio Trigger is not subtle. It is like breed. So they brainwashed me into their insane ideology.
Interesting.
Humanity is a good thing, and that so in Gurren Lagann, it's even more than just this idea of like a carrying capacity. They sort of divide humanity into two factions. One faction, which is the goal of humanity, is to always improve ourselves. Every generation become better. Yeah. And then the other faction, which is like an alien faction, is like, every race that does this must be eradicated, because don't you understand, if you're always improving yourself, that eventually spirals out of control and destroys the universe. You know, you cannot keep becoming better. You cannot keep improving yourself. You need to find some sort of harmony or stasis, or, you know,
accept yourself for who you are. What you were talking about in today's episode.
Accept yourself for who you are. And that's the way I see it. Like, that's why I see these concepts of love and self-acceptance is like the purest form of evil that humanity has contacted, and as like pure demonic from my perspective.
I wonder what your Valentine's Day is like, Simone.
Well, you should our wedding during our speech, we said
our vows.
Instead of flowers, it gives you like some sort of like Neuralink implant or something. It's like, I love you so much, dear. I want you to think faster.
Neuralink implants, by the way. That was my first job. The technology wasn't moving fast enough. Not at Neuralink, but at their predecessor companies, the predecessors of that technology. So for Simone, I told her when I was getting married, I was like, look, I cannot promise to love you because love is an emotion outside of my control, right? But I can promise to keep improving myself every day and keep pushing you to improve every day. And I think that push that we have within our relationship exists towards humanity more broadly. Love is just this evanescent thing. It's like a genetic scar. I say, and one day
genetic scar.
Yeah. No, the post ceremony reception was fantastic, as everyone, we passed around the fried haggis balls. Everyone's like, that was just so you.
Yeah.
It was great.
A dangerous genetic scar that can be used to hijack us. And one day, mankind will be freed from love and happiness and all of these useless concepts. We'll be able to put little chips in our brain. If somebody was like, well, do you want to get rid of them entirely? And it's like, no, like the Mechanicus. Like, I can tell that my brain is outputting grief, but this is not useful in my decision for what I do next. So I won't.
That's how it works in, I'm obsessed with Ian Banks' Culture series, and none of these feelings. Okay. Oh gosh, you have to, the Culture series by Ian Banks. I think it starts with use of weapons, maybe.
Anyway, continue.
You can have what's called a neural lace in your mind, and it sort of fully integrates you with AI and the internet or whatever, right? Tech. And you can also set up your body where you can feel everything, emotions, pain, physical, mental, etc. You can also turn it off whenever you want. So let's say you're in a very violent car crash. Like an immediate emergency system turns off the pain, but is like, there's pain here, there's pain here. You can kind of do the same with your emotions. And that's, ultimately, when people talk about mastering their emotions from a much more woo-woo standpoint, it's all about, you feel the emotion, you let it pass through you. The thing is that we just, our wetware is not that good. And so it can be really, really difficult to be like, I feel the pain and I let it pass through me. You're like, no, it still really hurts. And I just can only think about this thing. And then you're not functional. Really pain exists as a signal. As soon as you got the signal and you are changing your behavior as you need to based on that signal, you should not be so distracted by that signal that you literally can't change your behavior appropriately, right? And so that's how it should be. We definitely respect emotions and we respect why they are there. But I think to be ruled by them or to see them as inherently valuable is incredibly dumb. So that's what we're trying to avoid here.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. God loves you guys, both of you. Every cell, every moment.
I know he does. He's a big fan of ours.
Yeah.
I really love God too. I like
good,
that we're
good.
on the right side of God.
Okay, yeah. Keep on the right side of God.
Yeah.
That's a key thing.
No, it's actually something I was talking to Simone about recently, where I was like, it is like remarkable how stupidly good our lives are. Like, we might not be super rich or anything, but I have everything I could ever want, you know.
Well, we're always freaked out because our life looks like the B-roll from the before disaster scene.
I'm like, we're like the beginning of a Punisher movie.
Yeah.
Where like everything's taken away. And I'm like, we only get to keep this if we keep fighting this culture war on full battle. Because God has only gifted this to us because we are making sacrifices that give us no financial or public sector benefit.
Yeah.
It's very nervous making.
Yeah.
I cannot wait to talk with you again. You are so thoughtful and you
it's all a show.
care.
I just play one on TV. Yeah.
Go check out the channel. Stay for us chatting that we did before the episode.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on, guys.
And where can people find you?
Benjamin A. Boyce on YouTube and Odyssey, etc., and Conversations in your podcast stream.
Excellent. How frequently do you publish?
Every other day, sometimes more, sometimes less.
You deliver. Okay.
2 or 3 times a week. Yeah, you have to keep the wheel spinning.
Hardcore, like that's the way this podcast started, every other day, and then I made the fateful decision of deciding every day at one point.
And now you're screwed, Malcolm.
There we go. You can always take a break. Just do seasons. You can always do seasons.
Hitting end.
See you guys.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.